So moving on, we're going to talk about the probably the most contentious region of the 20th century, which is the Middle East. And the Middle East is mainly divided by questions of religion. Um, this should not be any surprise to you, considering that this is basically considered the Holy Land for three of the five major religions in the world at this point. Now, most of this dates back to World War One. After World War One, the Ottoman Empire is broken apart and it's divided into what's known as mandates by France and Great Britain. And I'm going to switch to the map because this will help you understand this a little bit better. So by 1920, this is what the majority of the Middle East looks like. You have the British mandate of Iraq, Transjordan, Palestine, and then the French mandates of Syria and Lebanon. And then later on in the process, Saudi Arabia is given its independence by Britain in 1932. Now, here's the thing. These mandates, as they're called, are not colonies. They're more spheres of influence. Essentially, each of these states is an independent functioning state. They have, nominal control over their country. They make political and economic decisions on behalf of their people. However, the British and the French, similar to the spheres of influence in China, in the late 1800s have an overwhelming amount of political influence and economic influence, right? The doors to foreign investment by British and French corporations are thrown open, and much of the oil rights in the area are claimed by British and French companies. This is the reason that BP, British Petroleum, is one of the 10 largest corporations in the world. Much of their success and growth is built on this mandate period where they exploit their access to oil from these areas. Now, here's the thing is during World War One, in order to gain support for fighting the war, the area around Jerusalem, which again has always been heavily contested, going back as far as the Crusades and the Jewish rebellion against the Romans, during the BCE era. That area is promised by the British to numerous different groups. Um, it is first promised to the Palestinian people that they will have their own independent Palestinian state, and that eventually the British mandate will be lifted. In return, they are, asked to rebel against the Ottoman Empire during World War One. At the same time, the British and the French are devising their own plans to divide up the Ottoman Empire, which is this mandate system. And on top of that, in order to gain support for the war amongst the Jewish community in Europe, the British also promise part of that land as part of a homeland for the Jewish people who have been historically diasporic people being forced from their homeland numerous times by different larger states and empires. So after World War One is complete, the British essentially double back on their promises. They create the Mandate of Palestine. They do not give the Palestinian people their own full independence. And the question of a Jewish homeland is basically just kind of delayed and shoved off, right? Now, all of this changes with what's known as the Balfour Doctrine. And this is essentially a letter signed and endorsed by the British foreign minister at the time, stating that it needs to be a priority of Great Britain, the League of Nations, and its allies after World War One to find and establish a permanent Jewish homeland, right? Well, in 1948, in response to the horrors of the Holocaust, the British essentially divide Palestine into two separate states, a independent Palestinian state and an independent Jewish state known as Israel. So as the British are enforcing these Jewish rights, Palestinians and other Arab Muslim states in the area are enraged. And in 1948, a coalition of Arab states declare war and invade Israel. And in about 10 months of war, the Israelis absolutely annihilate their enemies. And during this process, they also enlarge their claims in Palestine, essentially expanding to control 60% of the country. The remaining lands of Palestine are divided up amongst Egypt and Jordan. Now, what this does is not only does it create a strong anti-Western, anti-Israeli feeling in the Arab and the Muslim world, it creates a massive refugee crisis, right? Palestinians are forced to flee areas that are now under Israeli control. And at the same time, most Arab states expel the majority of their Jewish population. Roughly about 700,000 people flee to Israel. And this further deepens the religious divide. From there, Israel continues to expand its settlement into areas that are supposed to be reserved for Palestinians against the wishes of the United Nations and its allies. But still, the United States primarily and the United Nations continue to support the existence of an Israeli state. Now, over the next 20 years, there will be at least two more large scale Israeli Arab wars. One in 1956 over control of the Suez Canal in Egypt, right? And then another again in 1967, where Israel preemptively attacks its Arab neighbors in order to secure its borders. However, you can see across the course of this map that as Israel grows in size and strength, from 1946 to 2005, essentially Israel has come to basically take over the entire state of Palestine, with some Palestinian communities still spread out in the region. However, they're for the most part under Israeli control, right? Now, what pushes this conflict really into the forefront is that in the 1960s, with the assistance of the United States, Israel acquires nuclear weapons. And this creates a massive sense of urgency among the other states in the Muslim world because they now see that the West is not going to support them or even balance the playing field. The United States and, for the most part, the United Nations are completely on board with the survival of Israel. And this, for many people, solidifies the fact that the United States is willing to exploit the Muslim world on behalf of the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. Also, they see this just kind of as a continuation of centuries of exploitation under the Ottoman Empire and even after World War One. And so, as these anti-Western, anti-American feelings grow, you start to see the creation of militant Arab and Palestinian groups that are created to essentially control and combat Israeli expansion and existence. Two of the most important are the PLO. This is the recognized political body that represents the refugee population of Palestine. Now, early on in its inception, the PLO did engage in terrorism against the Israeli state and Israeli civilians. However, in the past decade, that has slackened off, and they have become more of a well, I don't want to say democratic, but they have become more of a non-terrorist state. However, right next door to Israel in Lebanon, you have the group known as Hezbollah. This is a very militant, very violent, anti-Israeli political party within the Lebanese government. However, they are backed and funded financially by Iran, who also sees the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons as a huge threat to its safety. So Hezbollah has, at this point, grown to become even larger and more powerful than the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army. They have their own military as well as their own media arm with schools and television stations and radio channels, etc. Now, Jewish Muslim violence is not the only conflict within the Middle East. Long before Israel had been established, there had been serious conflicts going back hundreds of years all the way to the Ottoman Empire between Sunni and Shia Muslims, right? Um, the most violent outbreak of this violence is the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988, where Sunni Saudi Arabia and Sunni Iraq engage in open war against the primarily Shia state of Iran. Even after this war comes to an end, both Iran and Saudi Arabia continue to engage each other in these proxy wars by funding different militant and terrorist groups in and throughout the region. Now, at the same time, while all of this is going on, you have ethnic minorities, especially a group known as the Kurds in Iraq and Turkey, that are agitating within those states for their independence. You also have the Palestinian communities in Israel that continue to fight for their independence and their own self determination. At the same time, you have over the past decade or so, the appearance of even more militant anti-Western groups such as Al Qaeda and ISIS, who have taken a more fundamentalist stand and interpretation of Islam and have played on the popularity of this anti Western, anti United States sentiment within the Middle East to grow their numbers and their influence. Now, all of this kind of leads to a really important question that is going to define what this region looks like over probably the next century. And that question is what role Islam should have in the post colonial world. Now, if you remember back to when we first talked about the beginnings of Islam, under Muhammad, the Islamic Caliphate is a theocratic state, meaning that there is no separation of church and state. There is no separate secular law. All law is based on the Quran, the Sharia, and Islamic tradition. Now, we saw this under the Ottomans during what was called the Tanzimat reforms, where the Ottomans tried to move Islam out of the public sphere and turn it into a more private setting. But even though this has worked for some states, like Turkey, for example, in other states, Islam still continues to play a defining role in public life. Many Islamic states, like Iran and Saudi Arabia, to a smaller degree, still define their legal system and their political system based on Islamic law and Islamic tradition. So this is going to be a defining question for the for this region, especially with the advent of groups like ISIS, who take an extremely hardline fundamentalist view and interpretation of Islam, and they are more than willing to commit violence not only against Westerners but also against other Muslims who they see as not falling in line with their interpretation of